I tested every new weapon in the DLC, and these are the 5 builds that I found to be the best. There are 2 other builds that deserve to be on this list. They are the Backhand Blades with Blind Spot and My Lady with Wing Stance. But since I already talked about them in my previous video, I will not repeat them here. Plus, they are kinda boring in comparison, so let's press forward with the more exciting stuff. This list is in no particular order, and I will be showing gameplay from all over the DLC, so consider this your spoiler warning. To kick us off, we have a Dragon Hunter's Great Katana build. While this weapon does not have the best scaling at C for both strength and dexterity, it makes up for it by having an amazing Ash of War, Dragon Wound Slash. The uncharged version of this Ash of War is okay, but you almost never want to use it uncharged because the charged version of the skill is just so much better. It doesn't take that long to charge, and the skill also fires off an aura beam, which deals significantly more damage and can double dip on top of the sword slash. The aura beam is what makes this skill really comfortable to use, as you can start charging the skill after an enemy attack, and regardless where they are, the skill is always going to hit because of the range. Just note that the range is actually shorter than it looks, so you will need to be closer to the enemy for it to hit consistently. At 18 FP, this is a very spammable skill, and you can easily get through an entire boss fight using only this skill with only 1 or 2 blue flasks. And as the name of the weapon suggests, this Ash of War is especially good against dragons. Not only that it does extra damage to dragons, the range of the aura beam makes it a perfect skill to aim at the head of the dragon, dealing insane damage and trivializing most dragon fights in this game. Also, the Great Katana itself is a great weapon type. Get it? The Great Katana is great weapon type? Never mind. It has a decent moveset, can bleed enemies, and does a pretty good poise damage too. Even at C scaling, the Dragon Hunter Great Katana actually has similar if not more damage than the normal Great Katana, so it is definitely worth using over the normal version if you like the Ash of War. As for the stats, we have 60 Vigor, which is mandatory to survive in the Shadow Realm, 30 Mind because you'll be spamming the Ash of War constantly, so having a higher Mind does make this build a lot more comfortable to use, 50 Endurance to wear some heavier armor and to keep up with the high stamina cost of the skill when fully charged. For damage, we have 54 in Strength so that we can hit the soft cap when two-handing the weapon, and we then dump the rest of the points into Dexterity. By the way, this is a level 180 character with the Samurai starting class. If you are lower level, just put less points into Endurance, Mind and Dexterity. For the talismans, the 2 important ones are Shard of Alexander and Godfrey's Icon to boost the damage of the Ash of War when fully charged. For the remaining 2 slots, I will recommend a more defensive setup to survive better in the DLC, such as the Dragon Crash Shield Talisman and a Magic or Elemental Damage Negation Talisman depending on what you are fighting against. For our next build, we have the Smith's Great Hammer with Savage Lion's Claw Ash of War. If you like bonking stuff to death, this is the build for you. With the Flame Art affinity, this weapon can get more than 900 attack power rating, making it a great candidate for a Savage Lion's Claw build. And you know what's better than bonking? Yeeting. Yes, with this weapon, you can roleplay as Thor and have your hammer magically return to you after throwing it. The damage of the hammer throw is not great, but it is decent enough to pick off some weaker enemies in 1 or 2 hits. And it travels pretty far too, so you can enjoy sniping away at a safe distance or aggro mobs over and pick them off one by one. It is not very useful in boss fights except for bosses that are easier to be fought at a distance, but so far I only found Bale fits that description. At melee range, Savage Lion Claws absolutely slaps, as you can just Unga Bunga bosses to death by spamming the skill. It has a lot of hyper armor, so you will rarely get interrupted, and the tracking is quite decent too. You will most probably take some damage because the full skill takes a while to perform and you will have your brain turn off, but the damage that you are dealing is so high that trading damage becomes a very viable option for most bosses. And if you pray hard enough, some attacks might even miss you because you'll be doing flips in the air when using this skill. The heavy jumping attack of this weapon is also very decent for picking off weaker enemies or faster moving targets. For the talismans for this build, Shard of Alexander is really good to buff the Ash of War damage. If you are focusing more on the throwing attack for certain bosses, you can then swap this out to Smithing Talisman. For the remaining 3 slots, I recommend going all defensive as you'll be trading a lot of damage with enemies. I am using Dragon Crest Talisman, Crimson Seed Talisman +1, and a magic or elemental damage negation talismans depending on the enemy. As for stats, we have 60 Vigor and 50 Endurance to soft cap on HP and Stamina, and only 20 in mind because even if we run out of FP, Savage Lion's Claw can still be used, just that it would deal a bit less damage, but still quite decent. Then 20 in Strength and 11 in Intelligence to meet the weapon requirement, and dump all remaining points into Faith. For the third build, we will be utilizing a weapon that can only be obtained at the end of the DLC, the Obsidian Lamina. You can get this weapon after beating the final boss of the DLC if you have completed Sir Anspash's questline. Its weapon skill, Dynastic Sickle Play, is one of the most fun and yet powerful skills in this game. It gives you access to an awesome side or backstab that repositions you to a good distance away, and has very long iframes that should make dodging a lot of attacks a hell lot easier. You can repeatedly dance around to dodge longer chain of attacks, and once it is safe, you can use the strong attack to dash back into melee range and do a quick slash for a very decent damage. And one more input of strong attack will do a 3-hit attack for massive damage, followed by a backstab into safety. This playstyle really rewards players who are familiar with the enemy's moveset and know when is the best timing to use the reposition move and prepare for a big counter attack. When it clicks, it has the ability to produce the most beautiful and fluid combat that you can find in this game. By the way, the weapon also inflicts bleed and does good points damage just as the icing on the cake. For stats, we have the usual 60 Vigor, 30 Mind and 50 Endurance because you will be spamming the Ash of War and it does consume quite a bit of stamina. We also need 12 Strength and 17 Arcane to meet the weapon requirement, and for the remainder of the points, we can just dump all of them into Dexterity. And for this weapon, we can actually wear the Anspach armor set to get an 8% damage increase on the weapon skill. But the defensive stat of the set is not good at all, so if you are having trouble surviving, the build will still function perfectly if you just wear normal armor instead. For the talisman, as usual, we have the Shard of Alexander for damage. And I find stamina to be quite a problem for this build if you are using the weapon skill to dodge repeatedly. So I'm using a 2-handed turtle talisman to help with that. Finally, Dragon Crest Talisman and a magic or elemental damage negation talisman as usual to deal with the insane damage in the DLC. The next weapon is quite commonly talked about within the community, but I had to include it in this list because of how good it is. We are talking about the Fire Knight's Greatsword. With the Flame Art affinity, this weapon gets more than 900 attack power rating, which is not surprising for a colossal sword. But what is surprising is its moveset. It is much faster than other colossal swords while maintaining similar damage and has an insanely long reach. And we are going to take full advantage of that long reach by pairing this weapon with the Flame Spear Ash of War. With this combo, you can impale things to death just like Mesmer did to me a million times, as the damage of the skill when fully charged is actually quite insane. And the full charge does not take that long, so there are actually plenty of opportunities to pull it off. As for the normal moveset, the light attack is extremely fast and can be chained with very little delay in between. This can stun lock some enemies, so you can just light attack them to death. The light attack after a dodge is also extremely good with its fast speed and very long reach. Since this is a faith build, you can pair it with any incantation if you would like to. But I don't really find it necessary besides buffing yourself, as the Flame Spear Ash of War can also serve as a range attack with pretty decent damage and range at only 19 FP. As for the stats for this build, 60 Vigor as usual, but we can afford lesser points in Mind and Endurance as it is not as resource hungry as other builds. So the rest of the stat distribution will look something like 80 Faith, 22 Mind, 40 Endurance and 22 Strength and 18 Dexterity to meet the weapon requirement. For armor, the Mesmer helmet does buff the Ash of War damage slightly, so you can use it if you like. If you prefer to wear a complete set like I do, The Fire Knight set is actually quite decent, as the helmet gives a slight increase in health, stamina, and equipment load. But unfortunately, this set does not hit the 51 points breakpoint, so just know that you will be interrupted by all kinds of attack in the name of fashion. For offensive talismans, we take Shard of Alexander and Godfrey's icon to boost the damage of fully charged Ash of War. And finally, Dragon Crest Talisman and a magic or elemental damage negation talisman should be the staple for most builds. For the final build, I have saved the best for last as a thank you for sticking till the end of the video. If you want to play Elden Ring in easy mode and have your brain turned off, this build is for you. The Carian Trusting Shield can absolutely trivialize most content in the game, as it can negate 94% of physical damage and 64% of magic damage. And while the enemies are doing very little chip damage to you, you can just stay behind the safety of your shield and stab them to death with the very same shield. It also has a respectable amount of guard boost, which means blocking with it will not consume a lot of stamina. So, for most combat situation, you just need to hold the shield button and mash light attack, and the enemy will most likely be dead or staggered before you run out of stamina. Even though this is a shield, there is a surprising amount of Ashes of War that are compatible with this weapon. Impelling Thrust, Vow of the Indomitable, Cracked Blade, and Barricade Shield are all decent options depending on the situation. But after a lot of testing and experimentation, I found the Bloodhound Stab to be the best option, as it provides an easy solution to grabbing attacks and allows you to reposition to safety when you are almost out of stamina. As for the affinity, Magic Infusion seems to give this weapon the highest attack power rating, so we will go with that. And since we are putting points into intelligence, we will have access to sorcery, which makes this build even better. We are using two spells in this build: Scholar's Shield, which is a buff to your shield that improves its guard boost and damage negation significantly, and Glintstone Pebble, which is a low cost skill to aggro enemy from a distance so that we can fight them one-on-one. The most important component of this build is the talismans, as they allow us to block more and deal more damage before having to retreat to recover stamina. We are using Great Shield Talisman to significantly improve guard boost, so blocking will cost less stamina. Viridian Ember Medallion and Two-Headed Turtle Talisman to increase our maximum stamina and stamina recovery speed. And lastly, Pearl Shield Talisman to help with some non-physical damage mitigation while blocking. I experimented a bit with the Royal Remains set, but then realized that the HP recovery only kicks in at the last 18% health, and the recovery rate is just too low to be viable. So it is better to just wear the heaviest armor that your equipment load can handle. Finally, for the stats, we have 60 Vigor, 50 Endurance, which is the soft cap for max stamina, 17 Strength and 13 Dexterity to meet the weapon requirements, 80 Intelligence, and then dump the remaining points into Mind or Faith if you are interested in using Incantation buff, which I'm too lazy to do. So these are the 5 builds that I enjoyed the most in the DLC so far. If you have any questions about the builds or suggestions for other weapons, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below. If you find this video helpful, please consider giving it a like and subscribe to the channel. It would truly mean the world to me. Thank you so very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.